In this video, I'm going to go over as much as I can explain about how to play Rogue in Phase 4 Season of Discovery. This is going to cover all the way through clearing Heat 3, so no matter what kind of PvE content you want, this should have you covered. Don't forget to follow me on Twitch and subscribe on YouTube. Still, most of my audience isn't, and let's get into it. When you first hit level 60, your eyes are going to be set on getting a Nixia tuned if it's your first character, collecting Tier 0, Undermine Reels, running Ubers for Fellstriker, and doing the 0.5 quest chain for Dark Mantle. These things are going to involve doing a ton of dungeons. You can choose to either tank or DPS them, and both options are pretty bad considering our lack of AoE and cleave damage. Here is the Backstab spec that everybody recommends for DPSing dungeons, and it's pretty similar to the leveling spec. This build is better than the raid builds because everything dies so fast, and it will also allow you to put up Sebaceous Poison very quickly to increase your group's damage. Here's a pretty basic tanking setup. You can go Mutilate or Saber Slash. It doesn't super matter too much for dungeons, and you'll want to actually get some tanking gear as well, but you can get by using your normal DPS gear if you have a solid healer. If you don't want to think about your cape rune, you could just use Blunderbuss all the time, but there are situations where the other ones are useful, like if your DPS is insanely low and the mobs have high health, Crimson Tempest can be good in that situation. And I'd really only use Fan of Knives for those giant undead packs in Stratholme because they're immune to bleeds. The Fellstriker effect does work on Blunderbuss and Fan of Knives, making them auto-crit. I'd recommend making your own Ubers run so it can be handy to make a key from the 3 gem bosses and Lobers, and then tanking that run with Fellstriker reserved for yourself. You'll see tons of rogues doing this. The Ubers key also has 10 fire resist on it, so that's kind of nice. Even though Dark Mantle did not get fire resist added to it, it's still a fantastic option to slot in the 4 set while you are transitioning to full bis. And speaking of sets, there are a lot of sets to manage, so I'll go ahead and get into gearing now. For Heat 1, normal pre-bis is going to be great with the Storm Shroud 3-piece and the Dark Mantle 4-piece. The most optimal setup is to include your boots and use the ones that drop in DFC. This is because Dark Mantle boots are notoriously low statted because they come with a stealth level on them, which eats away at some of the stat allocation. However, if you don't have the DFC boots, you can slot in whatever your most powerful off-piece is. This is made by Simonize, by the way. The Storm Shroud 3-piece can be expensive and you will outgear it pretty quickly. It might be worth skipping if you don't really plan on being low geared or farming Heat 1 for very long. Moving up the heat levels to Heat 2, this is where we're going to start talking about fire resist and where you're going to use sets like the Masterwork Volcanic set or the Devil Core set. I highly recommend purchasing the Devil Core set or the Corehound boots or both because one of those is included in the full bis setup. You'll also want to get the Dire Mole class book to turn in for the Royal Seal Trinket because it is also included in pretty much every fire resist bis setup. If you get a bis helm or pant option like the T1 hat or Devil Core pants, I highly recommend putting a Libram of Resilience enchant on both of them for 20 FR each. You can pay somebody else to put this on you in Ogremar, and if it's a bis, you'll never replace it, so it's well worth the gold. You can also get plus 20 fire resist on your cape from getting honored with the Hydraxian Waterlords. 96 FR is not hard to get, and you should still be able to fit in your Dark Mantle 4 set in Heat 2. It's a pretty massive DPS loss to take it off, unless if you're swapping to a T1 4 set setup. Okay, now for Heat 3, pretty much everything that I just said for Heat 2 is now just completely mandatory. It's pretty likely for your Gar set, you will be putting on every single piece of fire resist that you can get your hands on, even if it's suboptimal just to reach the cap. This can be things like the Flame Scarred Girdle from Strat Undead, the Fire Extinguisher Trinket from DFC, the Onyxia Attunement Neck and Onyxia Scale Cape, as well as the Wildfire Cape if you can get it, but it's really rare from Ubers. You can also get some 10 FR Bracers from Incendious and BRD. I happen to get these perfectly rolled attack power ones. You'll also probably want to get the Ocean's Breeze Ring from the Hydraxian Waterlord quest chain that lets you get a douse. Now ideally, whenever you're full bis, you don't actually use that stuff that just has fire resist on it, but this just gets your foot in the door for Heat 3. Also, all of these bis gear setups have the 15 fire resist enchant on your shoulders, which requires Argent Dawn Exalted, which not everybody's going to farm. And so you might want to do something like swapping out the Quick Strike Ring for the Ocean's Breeze. There's also stuff like the Lava Core Belt and the Flame Kissed Molten Helm. If you're desperate for fire resist, you can get these crafted, but you know, they don't really have great stats on them. And for Heat 3, it's a great idea to have both the Devil Core set and the Corehound boots because they have real stats on them. Some of you guys are probably asking, why would I buy Devil Core pants whenever it has less fire resist than the Masterwork Volcanic pants? And that's because the Masterwork Volcanic pants are terrible, they're garbage, they're going to nuke your DPS if you're wearing the full 3 set. So I would recommend that you only have to use 2. I was able to optimize this my first time in Heat 3 with a double 2-set 4-set setup with 2-set Volcanic, 2-set Devil Sword, 4-set Dark Mantle, and then lots of off pieces. Now ideally, and for you guys, you're going to have a lot more T1 going into Heat 3, and so just try and avoid the Masterwork Volcanic set altogether. In the raid, you're going to have extra fire resist from things like Mark of the Wild and Totems or Paladin Auras, and you can't count on those, they're unreliable, and you can't use them for Gar, so you're going to want to have memorized or written down the fire resist numbers for each gear setup. That way you know if you lose those things, you won't get one shot. And it's hard to calculate in the raid because your character sheet's going to say like 288 FR or something. You just want to avoid a situation where you think that you're good and capped and you have like 240, but then your shaman dies and then you just get one shot. In order to avoid the unreliability of these buffs on non-guard bosses, many people, myself included, pop a Potion of Magic Resist, which gives you 50 all resist. So whenever you pop this in the raid, your FR is going to stay exactly the same. However, it's a magic buff on yourself and not some kind of thing that somebody else is giving you, so it's more reliable. This can be useful whenever you don't need to use a potion during the fight, and it's a pretty easy boss. However, for Gar, you absolutely unquestionably need 226 no matter what. Now I'm going to get into the talent setups. Here is the raid mutilate spec. It's pretty standard Simonized copy-paste. If you're wondering why we don't get opportunity, it's because we don't have the extra points, and Seal Fate and Dual Wield spec are just better. If you're in a raid where you have to maintain expose armor and you have to spec into improved expose armor, you can choose to either get improved slice and dice or not. If you don't, then you want to run cut to the chase on your bracers for an easier rotation but less DPS. Improved expose armor is currently the strongest armor reduction debuff in the game. Your raid will hopefully want to take advantage of this, and so you or another DPS rogue will be doing it, unless if you have a rogue tank using Sebaceous Poison with improved expose armor talented, then you don't have to. In my most recent raid, I had to expose most of the bosses, and it's really not that bad. I was still able to do pretty fine damage anyway, but obviously people who aren't exposing or who have much better gear than you should be beating you. There are several bosses where normal Sunder armors from a warrior or homunculus and fairy fire bring the boss armor to 0. These are most of the servant bosses that you have to loot the hands from, so Lucifron, Gehennis, and Shazra. Sulfuron has higher armor for some reason, along with Domo, and because these are cleave AoE fights, it might be worth it to put Sebaceous on your main hand in order to sacrifice personal DPS and apply Sunder armor to as many mobs as you can with your normal Crimson Tempest spam. Because of this, you want to carry around Sebaceous Poison in your bags and the wet wipes from the Emerald Warden reputation to take it off. These are also BOE, so you can just buy them if you don't have the rep yourself, but normal Sebaceous Poison is a greater DPS loss than just actually casting the exposed spell, so do that instead. You also probably don't want to expose armor on Baron Geddon, because if you get the bomb, you won't be able to reliably refresh the debuff, so just let Homunculus do it instead. I don't play Saber Slash, but here are the raid talents. I would imagine that you're always keeping on Carnage, and so you wouldn't ever want to take off the improved Slice and Dice points, even if you are exposing. But I have no idea how big of a DPS loss it is to expose as Saber Slash. Finishers are valued a little bit differently in this build because Saber Slash only generates 1 combo point, unlike Mutilate. However, you do run Honor Among Thieves, and so that kind of makes up for it. Let's get back to gear and Fire Resist with these Fire Resist Bis list from Simonize. Here is a Saber Slash build that uses the cool Shadow Flame Sword with 2 pieces of the Iskander set with the right claw main hand, and then 6 pieces of Night Slayer for the 6th set and Devil Core on. So this is technically a double 2-set, 6-set setup. If you want to use swords instead of the Iskander stuff, this one's around 30 to 40 DPS off, made by Colasis. And here is a perfectly optimal Mutilate setup that involves getting a Puissant Cape, which might be a little bit annoying because it comes from Ezreal. Here's an alternative option that is 20 DPS off that swaps out the Devil Core for thick Corehound boots and aged core leather gloves and the cape for the Cape of the Shrouded Mist. I prefer this one because I don't like farming Puissant Cape and I like Cloak of the Shrouded Mist and aged core leather gloves as items, but if those don't drop, I'm willing to run either setup, of course, because I bought both the Devil Core and the Corehound boots. All of these setups are from the Simonize Discord, and they are reliant on having Mark of the Wild and Juju Ember, which are both magic effects, and so you still need a different set specifically for Heat 3 Gar. And you can make your own adjustments depending on exactly what you want to do on each individual boss that I'll get more into later. You can do either Saber Slash or Mutilate. Both builds have people competing at the very highest rank. I personally think Mutilate is more fun, but if you don't want to farm a Fell Striker, it's kind of easy to get your hands on a good main hand like a Viscag or something, and the Shadow Flame Skull is usually free as long as it drops. However, as far as tanking goes, Saber Slash is the prevailing meta. Here is a Heat 3 setup for tanking. And I think this is mostly because Mutilate generating more combo points doesn't really do anything when tanking because you don't have access to the best finisher in the game in Venom, and even if you did, you don't have Deadly Brew to make use of the additional poison proc chance anyway. Because of that, your rotation while tanking is mostly just maintaining stuff like Blade Dance, Slice and Dice, Rupture, Saber Slash Bleed, and your other runes like Honor Among Thieves and Unfair Advantage help you do that. The healing from using the Carnage rune is just not really worth it, and Unfair Advantage hitting with just a main hand unnormalized attack is going to be better for slower weapons like swords rather than daggers. Credit to Seon in the Simonize Discord for all this tanking information, and he has various setups for each heat levels for rogue tanks. You can still daggers tank for fun, I just wouldn't recommend doing it in a Heat 3 raid. For your race, for DPS you're going to want to be an Orc because Occult Poison and Deadly Poison scales with your attack power, and using the Orc racial to increase it before the first application will snapshot that attack power. And for tanking, Troll is like theoretically Bis, but you can just go undead in case somebody forgets to Fear Ward you. For Alliance, I'd probably go Human for the Saber Slash builds for the weapon skill, but you could also go Dwarf for Hugh Huron in AQ40, the 10 Frost Resist for Nax, and to use Stone Form for tanking and for PvP. But if you know that you want a PvP all day, Undead and Gnome are probably the best options. There's a lot of slows in the game, but Dwarf is pretty well-rounded, and just don't play Night Elf. It also looks like for Saber Slashing, being an Orc and having an activatable trinket is much more important because you can also snapshot the Saber Slash bleed. Here is a pretty good list of all the consumables. It is a lot. Some are much less necessary than others, so use your best judgment. Like the Elixir of Coalesced Regret is just one all stats, and some of them are situational depending on how hard you're trying or if you need it on a specific fight. A good example is the snowballs. They can be make or break, but if you don't remember to use them, they're going to do nothing. You can find all my Weakauras in the Discord, and I kind of recommend editing them. You might want to increase the transparency. I'll probably do that, to be honest. And as far as macros, you'll want normal start attack macros on your key abilities, a macro to snowball yourself, and a cancel or a stealth macro. Stealth macro makes it so you can jump in the air and stealth and unstealth to get the Master of Subtlety buff without losing any move speed. Some people like to use a start attack vanish macro, but I just like to mash a button that has start attack on it that's on the same key on my stealth bar as my regular bar when I vanish. Now let's talk about the rotation. For Mutilate, it's pretty easy. You just build to 4 or 5 combo points and Envenom while maintaining everything else and using Poison Knife on cooldown to build combo points. It's pretty annoying to run Carnage because Rupture doesn't really last that long. I wish it increased the duration, but it's a big damage increase, so you definitely want to. And for Saber Slash builds, what I've seen from Sims and log diving, it looks like Honor Among Thieves is doing a ton of work and you're really only doing 2 builders per spender. Okay, now for this last part, I'm going to go through boss by boss and give you tips and tricks or just general thought process stuff for each one. For Kha'Zix, buy an Elixir of Demon Slaying. For Azure Ghost, you can kick every single one of his casts. And for Onyxia, you can switch to Shadow Step and then quickly step Cheap Shot into Kidney, the Onyxia Mortar Trash. That's going to keep them locked down the whole time, and your raid can just burst them and they won't do anything. When it comes to Molten Core, for literally every single boss, you're going to want a second helm in your inventory to swap on that has Honor Among Thieves on it. This is so whenever you're killing the last trash pack before the boss, you can target the boss and build up 5 combo points on it and then switch to your regular helm before the fight even starts. You keep the combo points. This is so that you can have a slice and dice going into the fight, or if you're tanking, you can have Blade Dance already up. You don't really want to use redirect for pre-pull stuff like this. It only lasts 10 seconds and you have to use it from melee range. Also, on every single boss, you'll want to pre-pop a protection potion, usually fire, and sprint in unless if there's a good reason not to. Lucifron is an extremely short fight. We're going to pop a Resto Pot that hopefully is going to take off the curse whenever it gets applied to us, and we're going to want to get out as much damage as we can, as fast as we can, and not forget anything like Vanish, Cold Blood, or Thistle Tea. For Magmadar, ideally you get a Fear Ward placed on you, but if you don't, make sure that your Shaman has Tremor Totem down, or your Paladin is running whatever that rune thing is that also does Tremor Totem. If you can't be sure that any of these things are happening, just wear a PvP trinket and don't eat a full Fear like I did, unless if you're an Undead. For Gehennis, you absolutely have to use a free action potion, but other than that, it's pretty simple. Don't stand in front of the boss, and don't stand in the Rain of Fire. Be sure that you know what your tank is going to do on this boss, where he's going to kite, and make sure that he's going to use a free action potion, because if he doesn't, you're probably going to wipe. You can also kill Gehennis first, and then douse his rune, and then that will allow you to teleport there after you kill Magmadar, and then douse his rune. On Gar, you really just want to play it safe. You can stand in front of the boss against the wall with your tank and just eat the parries, or behind him and snowball yourself anytime that there's a knockback. Be absolutely 100% really super sure that you have enough fire resist, because you don't want to lose Mark of the Wild and just get one shot. On Baron, you really don't want to sprint in. We want to save our sprint so that way you can sprint out whenever you get the bomb and possibly sprint back in for more damage. On Heat 3, Baron bombs 3 people at a time and always has these bombs out, so it's pretty likely that you're going to get at least one. You can snowball yourself to stop from shooting up in the air and save you some time and fall damage. Pre-popping a graded fire protection and then using one during the fight is pretty much mandatory. And speaking of mandatory doubled protection pots, for Shazra, you'll want to do that exact same thing, but with arcane protection potions. For Baron and Shaz, you're going to want to play relatively safe. Don't be tempted to switch to Shadow Step for more uptime. It's really not. It's not worth the DPS loss of not taking Poison Knife. For Sulfuron, things are actually going to get mixed up a little bit because this is a big AoE fight. There's shadow damage going out, so you can use a greater shadow protection pre-pull or during the fight. Really, the only thing to do here is min-max your Crimson Tempest bleed uptime. Just make sure as soon as it falls off, you just put up a new one right away. Always 5 points. You will probably be assigned a kick, and so make sure that you actually do that, and try to stuff all of your cooldowns in your Blade Flurry window. Golemag. This fight is a literal target dummy. I love it. As melee, we do get a fire damage dot put on us, but it really doesn't do that much damage. If there was ever a fight to run low fire resist and pop a magic resistance potion on, it is this one. He has very little health and pretty much no mechanics, and so I popped a MR pot and ran 176 raw fire resist, and that just allows you to pump even harder because you're wearing much more regular gear and much less gear that only has fire resist on it. And this also has you covered in case if your shaman like rips aggro on the dogs or something. I don't even know how you die on this fight, but if it does happen, you know, you won't die with him. Major Domo is the second AoE fight where we're just also maximizing Crimson Tempest damage. This fight really sucks to be running the cut to the chase exposed armor build because whenever you're spamming Crimson Tempest, you really want Carnage. And if you're running Carnage and you don't have improved Slice and Dice, your Slice and Dices are just going to be smaller. Now for Ragnaros. Make sure that you check your weapon durability before the pull because he has a mechanic that reduces it. Ideally, your raid has a repair bot down in melee just in case anybody's weapons break. This is going to be another double GFBP fight, if not triple, depending on your kill time. Literally everything is fire damage, and so just stacking all the FR that you can isn't really a bad idea. You can snowball yourself to break any knockup mechanics, and I don't have any footage of this because I resisted them all, but do not even think about using Shadow Step because it puts you in the center of his hitbox in the lava. And it's also just way too much damage to give up. Poison Knife is really good. When the ads come out at 50%, you're going to want to pop Blade Flurry and go absolutely ballistic on them as long as you don't rip aggro and die. On Heat 3, they do this like suck in thing when they die, so you can use Sprint here just to be safe, but it's really not necessary. Your raid will probably keep one ad banished to prevent Rag from resurfacing immediately and then kill it after. You want to help kill this ad and then go to Ragnaros. If you go to Ragnaros early, then you're just going to be standing there watching everybody else kill it and you're losing damage and uptime. Even though my gear is pretty terrible and I was exposing, I got rank 15 Assassination Rogue and like rank 87 all classes or something on this fight. And for the Molten Core boss, it's pretty much a target dummy. If you get the Handshake mechanic, do it. That's pretty much it. It's another all fire boss, so just spam GFPPs. In summary, as comical as this sounds, it can be kind of a good idea to literally sim your gear for every single boss. Some you really want to play it safe and sometimes even go over the required amount of fire resist like on Ragnaros or Baron Geddon, and others like Golemag you actually get to pump. I personally really did not like any of this fire resist nonsense, and I wish that we could just use real gear and play the game normally. But if you're the kind of person who is a fan of all of this out-of-raid work and preparation, then you're probably going to have a blast this phase. Thanks for watching the whole video, like it if you liked it, and check out some of my other videos in these playlists right here.